dying and pregnant in a cabin, she was saved by the mountain man's love. The relentless wind howled across the desolate ridges, a mournful cry that echoed through the black pines and over the lonely gulch where a dilapidated cabin clung to the slope. Inside, a woman named Elara lay on a bed, her breath shallow and her belly swollen with life. A faded patchwork quilt offered little warmth against the biting cold that seeped through the walls. She closed her eyes, but the storm sound was a constant torment, a brutal reminder of her solitude and isolation. Each breath was a struggle, as if winter itself was pressing down on her chest. Elara had once envisioned a life of happiness, walking into a church on the arm of a man who had promised her love and devotion. But he had vanished without a trace the moment her pregnancy became evident. His letters ceased, and his name became a whisper of scorn among the villagers, leaving Elara to face the town's unforgiving judgment alone. The community had not forgotten her sin. Women averted their gaze, and men watched her with cold, hard eyes. The sheriff, Sheriff Grant, had bluntly told her that a woman must live with the consequences of her choices, a sentence that had driven her into self-imposed exile. She had packed what she could and fled to this forgotten cabin on the mountain's edge. Now, snow settled softly on the roof, a quiet shroud. Hunger gnawed at her, her last meal a mere crust of bread that morning. Her dwindling supplies, a sack of cornmeal and a jar of dried beans, offered little hope. She whispered to the child within her, a silent apology for bringing it into a world that had already turned its back. Pressing her hand to her belly, she felt a slight shift, a gentle reminder that even in her despair, life stirred. The fire in the hearth was dying. Elara, her movements heavy with exhaustion, managed to place the last log on the embers. As she returned to her quilt, a new sound cut through the wind, a deliberate crunch of boots on the frozen ground. Fear seized her. Wolves didn't walk with such a heavy step. Trembling, she grabbed the iron poker beside the hearth. The door creaked open, and a towering figure entered. His broad shoulders were covered by a buffalo hide coat, and his thick beard was rimmed with frost. His grey eyes, steady as river stones, swept the room and settled on her. He did not speak or move closer. "What do you want?" Elara's voice was a thin, ragged whisper. The man, a stranger, silently reached into his satchel and pulled out a wrapped bundle. He placed it on the table by the door-dried venison, hard bread, and a small tin of coffee. Without a word, he turned and disappeared back into the storm. Elara stood frozen in disbelief. Food 4 days. A rush of relief and shame overwhelmed her. She had accepted charity, revealing her frailty. A silent guardian the next morning. Elara forced herself to fetch water from the creek, her legs shaky on the icy path. As she bent over the bank, she felt a gaze on her back. She turned to see the man again, half hidden among the trees across the clearing. The town had once called him Silas, a soldier who had returned from war, and then retreated to the hills, living like a wild animal. Whispers claimed he was a man of violence who preferred solitude to society. His stare was steady, unreadable. Elara clutched her bucket and fled back to the cabin. That night, another bundle appeared at her door: split logs, dry kindling, and a piece of salt pork. Elara's heart was torn between gratitude and defiance. She did not want to be a spectacle of her weakness, but as the warmth of the fire filled the room, she wept softly, her tears a quiet testament to her desperate need. Days turned into a quiet routine of these offerings. Silas never spoke, but his presence was felt in the honey, rope, and fur pelts left for her. Elara's pride yearned to refuse, but her survival depended on his help. She told herself she would repay him once the child was born. Yet each night, she found herself clutching the quilt tighter, imagining someone still cared. One afternoon, a rare break in the clouds allowed Elara to venture out for snow. Dizziness overtook her, and she leaned against the cabin wall. When she looked up, Silas was there, carrying an armload of wood. He paused, his eyes taking in her fragile state. She tried to speak but could not. He simply set the wood down, expertly splitting it with a practiced rhythm. Without a single glance at her, he finished and walked back into the trees. That night, Elara sat by the fire, her hands resting on her belly. She thought of the gossiping women in town and their harsh words. They would never know of this man's quiet mercy. His silence was a refuge, far more comforting than all their sharp tongues combined. A life reborn. Winter's grip tightened. As the storms grew heavier, Elara's fear grew. She worried she might not survive the birth. Silas, sensing her anxiety, began spending nights in a chair by the fire, his presence a silent assurance. In late February, a fierce storm descended. Elara awoke in the dark to a wrenching pain that stole her breath. The child was coming. Her raw cry cut through the storm. Silas was at her side instantly, his hands hovering uncertainly. "Tell me what to do," he said, his voice taut with fear. Hours blurred into a firelit maelstrom of pain and screams. The storm outside mirrored the one within. Silas moved with clumsy care, boiling water and tearing cloth. His deep voice rumbled low, coaxing her, steadying her. "Hold on," he repeated, a lifeline in the darkness. At last, with a final, desperate cry, the child was born. Silas caught the tiny body in his great hands. He wrapped the newborn in cloth and gently placed it in Elara's arms. "Alive," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We are alive." Silas sank back on his heels, his gaze fixed on the mother and child. 4 years, he had buried his own grief in solitude, but in this fragile cabin, life had demanded his heart and his hands. Days later, the world was washed clean by the passing storm. Sunlight glinted on the pristine white snow. Elara, pale but strong, sat with her baby in her arms. Silas stood at the door, his gaze on the town below. The town's judgment remained, but within the cabin, something greater had been forged. When spring arrived, wildflowers pushed through the earth, stubborn and bright. Elara walked slowly into the meadow, her baby swaddled against her chest. Silas followed, his shadow long beside hers. Their gestures, his steadying hand on her arm. Her lingering gaze spoke more of love and trust than any words could. The townspeople, who saw them together, still whispered, but their gossip held less weight now. Dignity had replaced shame, and quiet strength had answered scorn. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of gold, Elara stood on the porch with her cooing baby. Silas joined her. "Do you ever think," she asked softly, "that we were meant to be left alone just so we'd find each other here?" Silas' silence stretched, then broke with a low, certain voice. "Sometimes the ashes hold more life than the flame." Elara turned to him, meeting his gaze. In his grey eyes, she saw not just survival, but promise. The mountain wind carried the scent of pine and thawing earth. She believed that the world, harsh as it was, might still hold a place for them. As the baby stirred, crying softly, Silas reached out, his calloused hand cradling the small bundle with surprising gentleness. Elara watched him, her heart swelling with a love that had not been declared or demanded, but had simply breathed itself into the very air between them. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the cabin in gold. Inside, the fire waited. A wooden horse rested on the mantel, and 3 lives, intertwined by storm and silence, prepared to step into a new day. Elara knew the storm that had once threatened to end her had, in fact, given her a life remade, a love born not of thunder, but of quiet endurance.